But an extraordinary 10-minute revelation last night by David Letterman here at the Ed Sullivan Theater. He told his audience he had allegedly been the victim of attempted blackmail.
I have two things to say about this. First of all, we've done over 6,000 shows.
On October 1st, 1993, something happened on David Letterman's show that CBS tried to bury forever. A comedian walked on stage and delivered his set to a laughing audience. The producers had approved every single joke beforehand. But when the show aired that night, his entire 7-minute routine had vanished. It was the first time in CBS history they completely cut a comedian's full performance after taping. The comic got a devastating phone call later that evening. What he heard would haunt him until his death just 5 months later. David Michael Letterman was born on April 12, 1947, at Methodist Hospital in Indianapolis. His father ran a small flower shop, and his mother worked as a church secretary. They lived in Broad Ripple, a quiet neighborhood not far from the roar of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. As a kid, he loved model race cars. He collected them with the kind of passion that made everything else fade into the background. He shared a house with 2 sisters, and though the Letterman household was solidly middle class, it was a place shaped by routine, humor, and quiet resilience. But when Dave was only 11, the world around him tilted. His father suffered a massive heart attack. Somehow, he survived, but that moment planted a fear in young Dave that never really left him. It was the first time he truly felt how fragile everything could be. Even as he tried to focus on school or toys or cartoons, that fear hovered in the background. The sense that his father might disappear at any moment became part of him. And when Harry died of a second heart attack in 1973, at the age of 57, it confirmed what Dave had feared all along. His father never got to see him on television, never heard the roar of a studio audience cheering for his son. But that early experience, that dance with death and survival, gave Letterman's humor something deeper beneath the laughs. Even as a boy, he found escape in voices. While other kids were outside playing, Dave spent hours pretending he was on the radio. He mimicked announcers. He invented characters. He even tried out voices inspired by Paul Dixon, a host from a Cincinnati-based TV show that aired in Indianapolis. Dixon would become his biggest influence. Years later, Dave would say that watching him on television made something click. "That's really what I want to do." He said it in 1969, just after college. But the truth was, he had been preparing for it since he was a kid. By the time he entered Broad Ripple High School in the early 60s, something began to shift. He went from being quiet to becoming that kid who could make everyone laugh. His classmates noticed it, especially Jeff Ashowski, who remembered how Dave would pass out scripts during recess and direct parodies, once even doing a Winnie the Pooh spoof with his friends. In speech class, when the teacher randomly called on him to give a talk, Dave ran out, bought blank index cards, and came back pretending they were notes. He improvised the whole speech. It was about juggling, and he made it all up on the spot. He got an A. What people saw that day wasn't just a class clown. It was a performer learning to trust his instincts. But before any of the lights and cameras, there was Atlas Supermarket. That's where Dave got his first job, working as a stock boy in his teens. Most people would just restock shelves, but Dave turned the place into his personal comedy lab. He played pranks on customers and tried out material on anyone who'd listen. It wasn't about being rude, it was about learning how far he could push a joke before it stopped being funny. Then came college. In 1965, he enrolled at Ball State University and immediately joined the student-run radio station, WBST. It was just 10 watts, barely enough to cover the campus, but for Dave, it was heaven. He got fired not long after. mostly because he mocked the classical music he was supposed to take seriously. That didn't stop him. He helped launch another station on campus, Wago AM 570. There, he went even further. He played awful songs on purpose. He made up fake news stories. He laughed when others were confused. Everything he did hinted at the absurdist style that would later define him. When he donated money in 1986 to fund a new station, the call letters WCRD stood for Cardinal Radio Dave. He never forgot where it all started. After graduating in 1969 with a degree in telecommunications, he got his first real job on television at WLWI-TV in Indianapolis. He was the weatherman, but not the kind you're used to. Dave didn't just deliver the forecast, he turned it into a performance. In one broadcast, he warned viewers about hail the size of canned hams. Another time, he congratulated a tropical storm for leveling up to a hurricane. He made up towns that didn't exist and reported weather there anyway. He joked that the Indiana-Ohio state border had disappeared in a scandal because the satellite map left it out. What he was really doing was testing how much absurdity an audience could accept without blinking. And he was learning they would accept a lot, as long as it made them laugh. Back at Ball State, there had been one person who helped keep him grounded. Her name was Michelle Cook. She was his college sweetheart, and their relationship lasted well beyond graduation. They eventually married and stayed together for 7 years. It was a quiet love story in the background of a man building something loud. Michelle was there while Dave struggled to find direction. She was there when he said he didn't know what he wanted to do. She was there when he first dreamed of hosting a show, and when he began stringing together those early TV jobs that nobody remembers. But the marriage, like many first loves, couldn't last forever. As Dave moved closer to Los Angeles in 1975 and chased bigger dreams, their paths began to split. Though much of what he wrote in college never survived, one thing was clear. Letterman had already figured out how to write like himself. Whether it was fake radio news, or absurd classical music commentary, or low-budget children's shows in Indianapolis where he used plastic dinosaurs to recreate Godzilla scenes, everything was starting to sound like Dave. He didn't wait to become a star before acting like one. His work at Ball State, his local TV segments, even his comedy experiments at the grocery store, they all blurred together into one long rehearsal for something bigger. In 1970, David Letterman stood in front of a weather map on an Indianapolis TV station, earning just around $150 a week. It wasn't much, but what he did with that small stage was unforgettable. He turned weather forecasts into absurd comedy. He congratulated storms when they were upgraded to hurricanes. He warned viewers about hailstones the size of canned hams. He made up snow reports for imaginary towns and once told everyone that the border between Indiana and Ohio had been erased due to shady political deals. Of course, that wasn't true, but to Letterman, it didn't matter. What mattered was making people laugh. His bosses didn't love it. He got warnings again and again, but viewers kept watching. It was here that Letterman started using television not just to deliver information, but to play with it. 2 years before that weather gig, in 1968, he had married Michelle Cook, a fellow student from Ball State University. She believed in him before anyone else did. When they moved to Los Angeles, they stuffed everything they owned into a pickup truck and drove west with nothing but hope. She supported him through the early struggles, even opening up her dorm room so he could host friends and work on comedy sketches. But as his focus shifted more and more to his career, the marriage began to wear thin. By 1977, it was over. Michelle had seen from the start that he wasn't meant for small-time broadcasting, and she wasn't wrong. Their breakup came right as his life was about to change forever. Around the same time as those wild weather reports, he took another strange job. It was called Clover Power, a Saturday morning children's show where he interviewed young kids from 4-H clubs about their farming projects. The show aired early in the morning when almost no one was watching. That gave Letterman the chance to try anything. He didn't just ask about pigs and corn, he asked absurd questions and poked fun at the whole setup. Sometimes it looked like he was making fun of the kids, but what he was really doing was sharpening his style. He turned that quiet little farm show into a comedy training ground. He also hosted a late-night segment called Freeze-Dried Movies, where he reenacted Godzilla scenes using plastic dinosaurs, then ended the show by pretending to blow up the TV station. These low-budget shows gave him complete freedom, and he used it. By 1974, he'd moved to radio, hosting a talk show on WNTS in Indianapolis. There were no cameras now, just his voice. That's where he learned timing and how to carry a conversation. He made prank calls, joked with strangers, and eventually pushed too far. He mocked local politicians, and station management had enough. They fired him. But it wasn't the first time. Back in college, he'd been kicked off his campus station for making fun of classical music. These firings didn't stop him. They pushed him forward. After WNTS, he realized Indianapolis had nothing left to offer him. If he wanted to make it, he'd have to gamble everything and leave. In 1975, that gamble finally came. Letterman and Michelle packed up again, just like they had years earlier, and headed to Los Angeles. They had barely any money. He didn't have a job lined up. He crashed on friends' couches and lived day to day. But then, something incredible happened. Jimmy Walker, star of the show Good Times, saw Letterman performing and hired him to write jokes. That opened the door to everything else. The writing team he joined was filled with future stars: Jay Leno, Paul Mooney, Louis Anderson, and others. They were all just starting out. And that old pickup truck they drove to LA? Letterman still owned it as of 2012. By 1976, he was performing at the Comedy Store in LA, the same stage where many careers were made or broken. Owned by Mitzi Shore, the club was small, gritty, and competitive. Comedians weren't even paid unless they became regulars. Letterman stood out, not just for his jokes, but for how he handled hecklers. He didn't back down. He fired back with dry sarcasm, turning tense moments into punchlines. It was at this club where his name started circulating among talent scouts, and it was there that he helped lead a strike in 1979 to get comedians paid. That strike changed the comedy world forever. But while his career was rising, his personal life was crumbling. In 1977, the same year his Hollywood breakthrough began, his marriage ended. He'd been with Michelle since college. She had believed in him from the beginning. But fame changed things. After the divorce, he told people he'd never marry again. He even joked that married men secretly admired him for being free, calling himself the last of the real gunslingers. It would take him another 32 years to marry again when he finally wed Regina Lasco in 2009, a woman he had dated since 1986. In that same summer of 1977, he landed a job on the Starland Vocal Band Show, a variety show on CBS. The band was famous for the hit song Afternoon Delight, and the show featured comedy segments with Letterman as both writer and performer. But it was a disaster. It ran for only 6 episodes before getting canceled. That short-lived show taught Letterman one brutal truth. Television success could vanish in an instant, even for stars with #1 songs and Grammy Awards. He never forgot that lesson. Everything changed in 1978. That was the year he got his first shot on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. Carson was the king of late-night television. His approval could launch a career overnight. Letterman's dry, sharp humor stood out immediately. He was invited back again and again. Eventually, Carson asked him to guest host. That was a rare honor. Carson saw something in him, and Letterman knew it. He later said Carson was the person who influenced his career more than anyone else. By 1982, everything came together. On February 1st of that year, Late Night with David Letterman debuted on NBC, airing right after Carson's show. It was strange, sarcastic, and completely different. The very first guest was Bill Murray, who immediately made things awkward on purpose. Letterman gave sarcastic studio tours and wandered New York, pointing out city problems like a fake investigative journalist. The show introduced segments like Stupid Pet Tricks and Viewer Mail, where he read ridiculous letters from fans and gave even more ridiculous replies. Unlike most talk shows, this one didn't follow the rules. Within months, it became a sensation and changed the way late-night television worked. Behind the scenes, a lot of that brilliance came from Merrill Markoe. She was the show's head writer and Letterman's girlfriend from 1978 to 1988. She created some of the most iconic segments, including Top 10 lists. Their romance and work relationship were deeply tied together, but it eventually fell apart. Markoe later said she felt overlooked and undercredited. After the breakup, she left the show, and many fans say something changed after she was gone. She would go on to win 4 Emmy Awards for her writing. Even years later, many believed the best Letterman episodes were the ones created during their time together. That same year, another storm hit the show: Andy Kaufman. Between 1982 and 1983, Kaufman made 11 chaotic appearances, but none more shocking than what happened on July 28, 1982. He and wrestler Jerry Lawler got into a real fight on the show. Kaufman wore a neck brace and claimed Lawler had injured him during a wrestling stunt. But when he asked Lawler for an apology, Lawler insulted him, then slapped him across the face. Kaufman threw his coffee and cursed loudly as he stormed off. NBC had to censor the entire segment. This was one of the first major controversies that showed just how unpredictable Letterman's show had become. It didn't stop there. In 1986, Cher finally agreed to appear on the show after refusing for 4 years. Letterman asked why she had avoided it for so long. Her answer stopped the room. She said, "I thought you were an asshole." The crowd gasped, then applauded. Letterman had even paid her $28,000 hotel bill just to get her to show up. In the end, they had a surprisingly good conversation. It became one of the most talked-about interviews in the show's history. It all began in 1993, when NBC chose Jay Leno over David Letterman to take over The Tonight Show. That one decision triggered a late-night war that would change television forever. Just 2 weeks later, on January 14th, Letterman stunned everyone by announcing he was leaving NBC and heading to CBS in a deal worth $14 million. It wasn't just a contract, it was a declaration of war. CBS had been struggling for years in the late-night slot, and now they were swinging for the fences. Letterman's new show premiered on August 30th, 1993, from the legendary Ed Sullivan Theater in New York. But NBC wasn't going to let him go that easily. They claimed they owned parts of his show, forcing Letterman to rename Viewer Mail to CBS Mailbag and ban Larry Bud Melman from using his stage name. Still, Letterman got to keep Stupid Pet Tricks because that bit came from his old morning show back in 1980. In the end, CBS finally had a hit, and NBC's grip on late-night dominance began to crack. Loyalty meant nothing when millions were on the table. 2 years later, in 1995, that momentum took a strange turn. Letterman was picked to host the 67th Academy Awards on March 27th, It was a dream gig until it became a disaster. He kicked things off with a joke no one understood. Oprah, Uma, Oprah, have you kids met Keanu? The silence in the room was deafening. The night never recovered. Critics destroyed him. Time magazine called him the worst Oscars host in history. The New York Times published a brutal review called "The Winner Isn't David Letterman." Letterman himself later said it felt like an explosion of excrement. He had accepted the offer against his gut feeling and couldn't shake the dread leading up to the show. Afterward, strangers at airports yelled at him, saying he ruined the Oscars. But ironically, the show drew the highest ratings in over a decade. People couldn't look away from the wreck. Just 5 years later, Letterman almost didn't survive to make it to another stage. On January 14, 2000, doctors found his arteries were so blocked, he needed immediate open-heart surgery. At just 52 years old, he was following the same tragic path as his father, who had died of heart disease in his 50s. Dr. O. Wayne Isom, a man who had operated on Walter Cronkite and Larry King, stepped in and saved his life. Letterman had joked with Regis Philbin on the show just the night before, not realizing he was hours away from a life-or-death operation. For the first time in his career, he missed shows due to something other than vacation. His fans were stunned, and the moment Dr. Isom said Letterman had the heart muscle of a 20-year-old, it felt like a miracle. Behind the scenes, something else had been quietly growing. In February 1986, Letterman began seeing Regina Lasco, a woman who worked in the television industry and understood the madness he lived through. At the time, he was still involved with his head writer Merrill Markoe, but his bond with Regina became something deeper. For more than 2 decades, they kept their relationship mostly private, surviving the gossip-driven Hollywood circus. Letterman once joked that they'd been dating since 1986 and figured they'd see where it went after 10 years. They had a son in 2003, Harry Joseph Letterman, and finally married in 2009 in Montana after 23 years together. It was one of the longest and most private courtships in entertainment history, and Regina remained his anchor during some of the hardest years of his life. But not even a steady relationship could protect him from scandal. In 1998 and 1999, during the height of the Monica Lewinsky scandal, Letterman's jokes were relentless. He mocked the entire situation with razor-sharp cruelty, calling Monica just a kid looking for a job at the White House, and apparently so was Clinton. One of his most brutal top 10 lists included lines like, "I knew someday I'd go down in history," and "Does this font make me look fat?" The White House was furious and reportedly sent complaints directly to CBS. Years later, in 2014, Letterman told Barbara Walters that he regretted it deeply, saying he and other late-night hosts had made a punching bag out of a young woman's life. That moment of remorse revealed the cost of comedy when real people get caught in the crossfire. In September 2001, just 6 days after the attacks on the World Trade Center, Letterman returned to his show with something no one expected: raw emotion. He stood on stage and said he wasn't sure if jokes were appropriate anymore. He spoke from the heart about the people who died, the first responders, and how broken the city felt. Rudy Giuliani had told him to go back to work and help the city heal, and so he did. That 10-minute monologue wasn't funny, but it was unforgettable. Viewers saw a different side of Letterman, one that wasn't sarcastic or ironic, just human. Then came one of the darkest moments of his personal life. On November 3, 2003, Letterman's son Harry was born. Less than 2 years later, in March 2005, a terrifying plot came to light. A man named Kelly Frank, who had worked as a painter at Letterman's Montana ranch, planned to kidnap Harry and his nanny for a $5 million ransom. Frank had keys to the house, knew the routines, and even knew where the baby slept. He told someone about the plan, and that person went straight to the police. The horror of what could have happened haunted Letterman and forced him to overhaul his security completely. Things didn't get any calmer. On October 1st, 2009, Letterman walked on stage and told his audience something no one saw coming. He admitted he had been sleeping with women on his staff and that someone had tried to blackmail him for $2 million. The confession stunned the crowd. It wasn't a joke. He said plainly that he had done terrible, terrible things and that the story would embarrass many, especially the women involved. He had just married Regina Lasko earlier that year. Now, everything was falling apart. He started therapy. He made public apologies. He tried to patch things together on and off camera. It was the most painful stretch of his career, and he handled it in the only way he knew how, by talking about it. In the middle of all this chaos, a strike hit Hollywood. The Writers Guild of America went on strike from November 5, 2007 to February 12, 2008. While Jay Leno and Conan O'Brien stayed off the air to support the strike, Letterman made a move that shocked everyone. His company, Worldwide Pants, made a separate deal with the Writers Guild. His show came back on January 2, 2008, with his full writing team. It gave him a huge edge over his competitors, but also made enemies. Many in the industry felt betrayed. Even though what he did was legal, it made it look like he had crossed a line. Letterman didn't apologize. He aired his show, made his jokes, and weathered the storm. In March 2010, Letterman and Regina finally had their wedding, but the joy was mixed with the fallout from the scandal the year before. He talked about their counseling sessions on air, admitting they were working to rebuild what had been broken. He said it might not be the same, but it could be better in a new way. This openness struck a chord with audiences, many of whom were going through their own relationship struggles. His honesty turned into a kind of therapy, not just for him, but for viewers, too. Then, on April 3, 2014, during a taping, Letterman called time. He told the audience he had spoken with CBS President Leslie Moonves and decided he would retire by May 20, 2015. He was 66 and tired after 33 years in the spotlight. When the final episode aired, it was a moment of history. Letterman had hosted 6,080 episodes, more than anyone in late-night history, even Johnny Carson. 13.76 million people tuned in to say goodbye. 4 presidents appeared in a farewell skit. Steve Martin, Jerry Seinfeld, Tina Fey, and others came to pay tribute. The Foo Fighters closed the show with Everlong. It felt like the end of an era. After stepping away, Letterman changed completely. He let his beard grow long and white. He told the New York Times it was a reminder that his life was now different. No more makeup, no more suits, no more pressure to look like a TV host. The beard became his badge of freedom, his way of saying he was done playing the game. Some people called it a retirement beard. Others called it an achievement beard. But everyone agreed it was the new Letterman. Then, in January 2018, he came back, but not in the way anyone expected. His Netflix show, My Next Guest Needs No Introduction, was stripped down and intimate. No band, no monologue. Just 2 chairs and 1 guest per episode. His first guest was Barack Obama. It was Obama's first big interview since leaving office. The show gave Letterman full creative control, and he used it to have real conversations with people like Malala Yousafzai, George Clooney, Jay-Z, Tina Fey, and Howard Stern. Paul Shaffer, his old band leader, even composed the theme song, inspired by the soulful sound of Muscle Shoals. And somewhere along the way, Letterman began to change inside. He started talking about climate change. National Geographic featured him discussing environmental issues. For a man who had once only cared about punchlines and ratings, it was a profound shift. Now, he was using his voice for something bigger than entertainment, something that mattered. But even all before that, there was one incident. It was October 1st, 1993, just another night in television until it wasn't. Bill Hicks had performed on David Letterman's shows 11 times before, so when he walked onto the stage of the Ed Sullivan Theater that afternoon, it felt familiar. The audience laughed, the jokes landed, and the producers had already approved every word. There was no sense that anything was wrong. But by the time the broadcast aired that night, Hicks's entire 7-minute set was gone. It was the first time in CBS history that a comedian's full routine was completely cut after taping. Viewers at home had no clue what had just happened. The live audience had seen something that no one else ever would, at least not for another 16 years. Back at his CBS booked hotel room later that evening, Bill picked up the phone. The voice on the other end was Robert Morton, the show's executive producer. Morton's words were vague at first, then gutting. Basically, all of it was a problem. Hicks, already worn from chemotherapy, sat in silence. He had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer earlier that year, and though only his family knew, he was in the middle of a private war against time. He had fought to keep working, to keep laughing, to keep pushing boundaries. But this call wasn't about sickness. It was about fear. Not his fear, CBS's. Hicks asked what had changed between the afternoon taping and the night broadcast. He asked why jokes that had earned laughter were now threats. The network didn't answer. It never really did. What no one knew in that moment was that Hicks had less than 5 months left to live. He would never appear on Letterman's show again. He would never get to speak about the incident on air. He died on February 26, 1994, at just 32 years old, feeling betrayed by the very stage that had once embraced him.